So, welcome back to the KO'd Convo, and it's been a long time since episodes, like a monthly span, but luckily enough, we're back, and we're back with a bang. Got a good guest on here today for you listeners out there. Honestly, one of my favorite authors coming when talking about the my life self improvement sense, excuse me, and mindset sense. Darrin Donnelly is with me today. Darrin, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Keenan. I'm glad to be on.
Yeah, exactly. It's always nice to talk to somebody with such an Irish name as well as myself. So
Yeah, I thought of that too. It is nice.
yeah, exactly. Um, so Darrin is the author of the Sports for the Soul series. Amazing group of books, and he just came out with another one called the Turnaround, which focuses all on confidence. But you can check them all out, obviously, on Amazon and wherever you buy your books, and sportsforthesoul.com. So, Darrin, before we dive into the context of the books and stuff and some of your favorite writings, I just want to ask, so where did Sports from the Soul really stem from? Like, what was the sort of birth behind the series?
Well, I guess I've been an entrepreneur for since college. I mean, it's going on probably close to 25 years now. Was involved in other, of course, this was back in the 90s when you kind of anyone that could learn how to build a website had a pretty good leg up when they for starting businesses. And that was the route I first went through more. Even though my growing up and things like that, I always wanted to be a writer or a football coach. Those were kind of my two things I was heading towards. So in college, I was heading more towards journalism sort of thing, but got bit by that entrepreneurial bug. Like I said, in the 90s, there were a lot of startups and dorm rooms and things like that. Mine was a laundry room in a house I shared with some roommates. And so we got into that, and through the years, the business grew, expanded, went through different variations. So I guess this is all a longer way of saying it's not like I just decided right from the start this is what I was going to do. This sort of evolved from my own experiences as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, going through the ups and downs of of running a business. There's going through recessions, things like that. There are some tough times, and you have to learn from them. But what I always helped me going through and running a business was constantly feeding my mind. Feeding your mind positive self improvement material, books on business and that sort of thing, but also books on just mindset, like you were talking about. Uh, Books from just any type of personal development guru. Um, but what I noticed as time went on was that there were some contradictions, between what some people would say, and you get in that moment of what are you going to trust? Whose voice are you going to trust? And one thing I always went back to were people involved in sports. The first personal development book I ever bought was called Winning Every Day by Lou Holtz, and it was I would have been either a freshman in college or just getting ready to start college. But I bought the book at a time when I did not have the money to buy books. It was like
Yeah.
a sacrifice to buy that. And I'm biased, of course, but to this day, that's a book. It's my favorite ever. It's the one I go back to the most. It's because it was the first book. I bought it more just because I was a Notre Dame fan and he had recently retired, and just wanted to read. And then all of a sudden, you realize this is a self improvement book, and it was that first book that told me you have choices here. You can really determine your destiny, and how important your attitude is, how you handle adversity. All these things were really, and it was such a, it's not like I hadn't heard some of that stuff before, but never put this way, never so much. Success is a choice, and so directly and bluntly from a coach who had so much success. And so I'd always been reading a lot of those type of books. And so I guess based on my experience as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneurial, I would go back and say, okay, who can I really trust when you have conflicting advice? I remember, I don't know if you remember when The Secret got really big. It was a book in the 2005 around there, and it was sort of this philosophy that you control everything in your life based on how you think, and I remember, and that kind of, it got so big, became this national phenomenon. It was a huge bestseller, and it started. I noticed that whole idea getting involved at every most of the big time personal development books that came out seemed to have, it was definitely an influence on those. And I remember at one point kind of thinking, and then of course the big recession happens right around that time, and I remember thinking, this, it's I'm not picking on The Secret or anyone involved with it. I'm just saying I remember feeling a little unsettled by it. You had this idea that, hey, as long as I think positive thoughts, nothing bad will ever happen. And I understand some of them have walked back that message and said, hey, that was just an introductory thing. But I found it to be a little, that was where I said, would a coach like Lou Holtz, would a coach like Bob Stoops, these coaches who have had big success, would they be teaching this concept to their teams? Obviously the answer is no. There's a lot of hard work involved, and you can do everything right and still face adversity. You have to accept that there are just some things you cannot control in life, and if you think otherwise, you can start to drive yourself a little crazy, I think. So I went back to sports as, I guess, the great proving ground. They call sports psychology the science of success, because results matter. Everything can be measured. We can say, a guru can get up there and say, hey, do this visualization technique, and you'll feel so much, it'll have these results in your life. And that's great. And he might be right, might not. For sports psychologists, they can take a group and actually test it out. You can say, okay, we're going to have this group, go through these visualization techniques for shooting free throws, and we're going to compare it to the group that didn't and see who improved the most. And you can have data that backs up all these things. And it's the same thing with coaches in general, even if they're not specifically involved in sports psychology, they're involved in running their teams, and the scoreboard never lies. What kind of leadership strategies work, and you can learn from that. And so I guess, yeah, to answer your question, that encouraged me to get back into I still read plenty of stuff from psychologists and, any type of personal development, business, marketing, all that stuff. But I believe that sports are the ultimate proving ground. So by going back to making sure that, this strategy has actually been tried out in the world of sports, and to see how that can convert into life, that's helped me a lot. So books that shared that.
Yeah, and is there a sense that people go back to sports because a lot of people can relate? Um, it's more relatable than some other like industries, I would say.
Absolutely, I think I agree completely, because you've got, it's the great metaphor really for life, I suppose. You've got a very clear goal, and it's a team, usually a team, but you've got a very clear goal. You've got a very specific score. Whatever adversity you're trying to overcome in life, or whatever uh, your goal is with your job, or even just personal life goals. Those are all exactly relatable to any athlete or coach who has a very specific goal. And I feel like my books try to represent that the seasons in the book are supposed to be metaphors for the seasons of life that we all go through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you on that 100%. Want to take it back real quick. So you're obviously a sports guy. So growing up, which sport was your favorite? Did you play all of them? Who were your teams? You know, the basic questions.
Yeah, no, I was a big football fan from a really young age. I grew up in a small town where it was football was a really big deal. So, we all got involved with the high school teams, and I went to a small Catholic school, and it was kind of a K through 12 school, and we were all very much involved with with what the high school team did, and your faith was all it was all intertwined, and how important sports were to improving as people. Um, and then so I grew up a pretty big Notre Dame fan, for sure. That's always been my team. And then but I grew up in Kansas and went to college at Kansas State, and so then that was and what a great time I went there. When we when I was there, we had seasons that were just every year was 11 wins, and we were just one win away here and there from. So I had a lot of fun as a college football fan. But I love all sports. I love all competition. Football is definitely my top sport as far as just a personal favorite. But I think I wrote a book on baseball called Relentless Optimism, and you want to talk about a sport where you have to learn how to deal with failure. I don't think anything comes close to baseball as far as the best hitters in the league are going to still fail 7 out of 10 times at bat, and just dealing with that. What a great metaphor for life. What a great sport to learn from.
Yeah, yeah. So is it safe to say that no Jayhawks are allowed in the family?
Actually, my wife got her master's from KU, so
Oh, okay.
I shouldn't say that, but and we'll see where my kids end up going. But yeah, no, yeah, we're definitely a Wildcat family right now. I
Well,
hope it stays that way. No.
well, I mean, they upset Oklahoma a good amount of times in the last couple of years, so you never know. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
you know. Um, so yeah, let's dive into the books here because obviously the first one, Think Like a Warrior, you mentioned Relentless Optimism as more of a baseball focused book, but Think Like a Warrior in a way is completely the opposite because you target multiple sports and multiple coaches in that uh, along that journey, obviously. So when you're thinking about the uh, the mindset, right, and this self improvement aspect of the things, and you're looking at the Sports for the Soul series, what really goes into one of these books in terms of from start to finish? Like break down the process. Like, do you already have a plan set out of like the next of what the next book theme is, and things of that nature?
That's a good question because yeah, each one's a little bit different. So yeah, like you mentioned, Think Like a Warrior. That was the first one, and that one probably came about more kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier, how Sports for the Soul really began in my mind and everything. It did be it began from it came from sort of that, like I said, a little bit of a reaction to, after going through the recession and seeing how some of the big promises that were being made by self-help gurus at the time that, boy, if I'm just positive, I will never have anything bad happen to me. I wanted to make sure I addressed that head on. And so, yeah, I went back. The premise of the book is a coach who's struggling, about to get fired, a college football coach, and his personal life's a mess as well, as far as some business dealings he had that went wrong, and he's just really kind of at the end of his rope, and he ends up getting these sort of mysterious, dreamlike visions from great coaches of the past, John Wooden, Bear Bryant, Vince Lombardi, Buck O'Neill, and Herb Brooks, and each one teaches him a certain lesson uh, for being successful, not only in sports but also in life. And one of the very first lesson he learns is to focus only on the things you have total control over. your effort and your attitude. So to go back to to answer your question a little more, I that was a book where I really kind of knew what I wanted to address at first, but it did evolve as it went on, and I guess um, it was a really fun one to write because it involved so much research in these actual coaches. So when I was working on the John Wooden section, it was just constantly reading, researching, going back to old interviews, watching things he said, reading old interviews, reading books he wrote, reading books that were written about him, and really trying to find his voice and capture that. And I did that with all the coaches. So it was really a fun one because I didn't know exactly what the main messages would be as I went along. It just kind of happened. It was a really fun and neat writing experience because they did each of those main five lessons that get talked about in the book. They just kind of evolved from each coach's uh, personality and what he really taught back when he was a coach. And really, and there's always some crossover between all of them. Anyone who's had success at a high level, there's going to be some crossover, and they're going to teach similar things. But I tried to capture what each of those coaches were best known for as far as the lesson that they taught.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So now your newest one just came out in May. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, May. The turnaround, which is all about confidence, um, and confidence certainly is not a touchy subject, but it's certainly one of those tricky ones. Um, so, in your mind, what what defines confidence?
Well, the book, yeah, it's basically believing in yourself. The book is about confidence, like you said, but also a winning attitude. Okay, well, what is a winning attitude? And you start going through all that. Well, it the most important component of a winning attitude is self confidence, believing in yourself. Um, and we could call it your self image as well. It's how you view yourself. You either see yourself as someone who can succeed, someone who can be successful, or someone who can't. And so that you know uh, when we talk about self-image, it's been famously said that you'll never outperform your self-image. Okay, so if you have a confident self-image of yourself, you're going to achieve at a higher level than someone who does not. And I think coaches will tell you one of the questions they get asked by their athletes the most is, coach, how can I gain more confidence? It's something we're all dealing with, and obviously it transfers to every area of life, business, personal life, everything. More successful people are usually the more confident people. The most successful, confident teams usually win the games. Um, so I thought it was a very important book to write, a very important subject to make sure spent a lot of time and was worthy of a whole book to talk about.
Obviously, six books in now. Do you have a long term plan as to how many books you want in the Sports for Soul series, or is it kind of a take it take it book by book kind of mentality?
Well, it's book by book, but I do think the goal right now is to, and listening to my readers and hearing back from people is people just want more. They want more. One of the things, so this start, we're kind of going back to what you originally asked. How did this all start? So it started as kind of this is what helped me the most, and to make the parallels between life and sports, and learn from the great leaders in sports whose result, the scoreboard never lies. You can see the results and if it's working or not, and then you apply that to your life, and you'll find similar results. So it started as that, a blog and that first book, and but I think now it's evolved more to people want to keep feeding their minds positive things, and that's what these books do. Each they're fictional fables, they're stories that teach these lessons and what it takes to succeed. So they're told as sports, whether it's football, boxing, baseball, basketball, we're doing them all, but it's not so much the sport that matters as it is the lesson. And what I'm hearing from readers is just how much once someone, especially buys the first one, for instance, Think Like a Warrior, how many of them then buy all six of them? And then they're asking, hey, I wish these came out once a month. I wish these came out. Now I
Yeah.
can't crank them out that fast, but the goal would be to have 3 or 4 a year eventually, where you can just constantly, because it's so important. What you feed your mind does determine the kind of life you live, and with culture today, and what's on the news all the time, and everything else, it's bad news sells, unfortunately, and so we're constantly being bombarded with fearful headlines and bad news. So we do have to really take control of, okay, what can I feed my mind with that's going to keep me positive and moving in the direction that I want to be moving in life. And so I hope my goal is for the books to be that source, that you go to bed at night reading something like that, as opposed to something that's gonna reading your phone, or something that's gonna keep you up at night.
Are you already in works on your next one?
I am, yeah, already, but I always have to keep that quiet. I find that the more I talk about them, the slower I write. So I've learned to not say anything about the new one until it's actually finished. So
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, people's mindsets have become, and self-improvement tactics have become more prevalent than ever, obviously, because of the pandemic, and people were staying close to home, or supposed to stay home,
right.
not stewing, but you catch my drift. So just your experience with the pandemic, and do your books kind of did you feel your books kind of helped in that sense, with such a big time, such a big a time as the pandemic was?
Well, I sure hope so. I think the main message that keeps it getting basically told again and again and reinforced in each of my books is that you really don't control everything in life. None of us saw this COVID thing happening. Obviously, none of us could have unless, I mean, obviously some people might have predicted there was a danger or something like this at some point, but none of us really, started off the year thinking, boy, I bet my kids won't be able to finish in school this year, because of a pandemic. So it was such a shock, and such a tragedy to so many families. And so I think the first step of handling anything like that is to recognize, okay, there are some things I can't control. All I can do is control what I can. Lou Holtz likes to say that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. I agree completely. That's the message. What we do control is our attitude and our effort. We can obviously take uh, precautions in something like this, learn from whatever the science is telling us, and we all need to do that, absolutely. But we also need to make sure we're keeping a positive attitude, and doing the best with what we are able to do, and not get so focused on what we can't do. We'll just get depressed doing that. And so, absolutely, I think the message of these books, and the Sports for the Soul series, and everything I try to teach is absolutely reinforcing. Control what you can control. Don't the problem I had with some of the past personal development stuff that I was talking about, this idea, a little bit more of a went down a little bit more of a woo-woo path, I guess I would say, where it's like that you control every single thing that happens to you. You're the kind of the center of your own world. We know that doesn't happen, and it certainly doesn't happen in sports. You can the best team doesn't always win, and I mean, you can do everything right, and the weather's bad, and there's just so many factors you don't always control. But the key is to keep your focus on what you do control, and that's really what positive thinking and all these messages are about. It's not, hey, if I just stay positive, nothing bad will ever happen. It's that if I stay positive and believe that I can get through whatever comes my way, I will. And you have to believe that I will, I will grow from this. I will get better. I will overcome this, and not just, oh, I must. If something bad happens, oh, it's because I did it somehow. I caused it myself. Certainly many times you could have a role in it, but you can't beat yourself up about it, and you have to learn from it. And some things you'd have absolutely no role in at all. It just, like this COVID, it's just something that happened, and we have to attack and adapt.
Yeah. So in terms of the turnaround book that just came out, obviously it was. I think you were telling me it was supposed to come out a little earlier. Were there circumstances because of the pandemic that you had to overcome in terms of getting that book done and really releasing it on time?
Yeah, actually, yeah, there was just when that happened. You're right. I remember that now, and it was there was I believe there were 2 years between that book and the last one almost, and so normally, yeah, so that was a little longer, and certainly some of it was COVID related. For one thing, I think all authors had to take a step back and say, okay, if I'm writing anything that's happening while COVID is happening, do I want that to be a part of the book? I decided for this one I did not want it to be, but so that any of the present day stuff was actually in 2019. But so yeah, it definitely caused me to some delays as far as how best to handle with that, and also just listening to people and what are the messages that are, we're all constantly evolving, and there are different times when different topics I think are going to be more useful, and I wanted to make sure I was aware of that, especially post COVID.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was just really curious about that because I know everyone was affected in their own way, so I just wanted to hear your side of it. So looking at all the coaches that you've written about, obviously, and all the coaches you have researched, obviously, you said Lou Holtz was one of your biggest influences when you first got started with this. After researching these endless amounts of coaches that you do, are there any specific ones that really stood out to you that you fell in love with and with their mindset and their coaching style and things of that nature?
Well, gosh, there are. I mean, obviously, Wooden, the people that in Think Like a Warrior. Obviously, John Wooden's message is, what a just a wonderful message as far as positivity and uh, uh, I would also say, gosh, as I'm thinking of them all, I'm just getting flooded. Vince Lombardi. There's just some great biographies written on him, and what an interesting guy. If you really research him, he's a caricature in some people's minds of like this very old school guy, but really there's much more to him, and he's very very into his faith and things like that. And so he was one. I'll tell you, I had a lot of fun on this last book for the turnaround. It's basically a story, a college football story, and it's set. The character is basically looking back on his life of going, when he was a fourth string quarterback at one of the worst college teams in America. New coach comes in and turns around the program and also turns around his life. And so the book kind of talks about how the things he learned in college also turned around his life and his career and his personal life. And so that was fun to do. But so the main seasons of the story take place in the late 80s. And so I wanted to make sure I talked to some coaches who were there and were involved. So I was able to interview Coach Holtz, Lou Holtz, and also Barry Switzer, who ran an awesome program at Oklahoma back then. And boy, both of them were just wonderful to talk to, and I'm so appreciative of the time they gave me. But yeah, so Barry Switzer would be another one who just couldn't have been a nicer guy, and just a very positive, and talked with them both during the COVID stuff. And I remember asking Coach Switzer, if what is your self-talk when things like out of your control happen. You lose a game or something happens in business, and I'm thinking COVID, that kind of stuff. And he just said, shoot, you play the hand you're dealt. Well, he didn't say shoot, but that's Terry Switzer. But he
Yeah.
said, you play the hand you're dealt. You don't look back, and you keep moving forward. And I just thought, what a great self-talk image. You play the hand you're dealt. You really have nothing to do with that, But what you do after with that hand is everything. And he just kind of blurted that out. That was kind of his self-talk, and I just thought that's a pretty powerful image to keep in mind when you get hit with something you don't expect.
Did you get a little boyish excitement when Lou Holtz gave you the okay to interview him for the first time?
Oh yeah, it was an honor, definitely. Well, and I said, I even told him that was the first, self-help book I ever read, and changed my life. It really did, and so I think that helped me get a good interview. But no, I another great story I had was about Buck O'Neill, who was featured in the Think Like a Warrior book. And for those who don't know, he was a very very successful player in the Negro Leagues and also as a manager. This was back when there were the quote Negro Leagues that were when baseball was segregated and African Americans were not allowed to play in the majors, and he would have been just a legendary player, I'm sure, in Major League Baseball and probably a manager too. But he ended up becoming the first African American coach in the majors. He was a coach for the Cubs, but before that, he was a longtime manager for the Kansas City Monarchs, which was basically the New York Yankees of the Negro Leagues.
Right. I
And
do remember that. Yeah.
and his story is just amazing. I mean, if you can, he wrote a book that's a great read, and there've been books written about him. But his main message was to just always, love what you do, and really attack each day with joy and optimism. And after everything he'd been through, I mean, he's got stories about dealing with the Ku Klux Klan back in the day when they were trying to, play baseball, and just amazing that he kept such an optimistic, hopeful view in life, and so he's one that, well, I recommend everybody read more about him. He was featured on that Ken Burns baseball documentary, and he just was just an amazing man. And but a funny story is I had a friend that read my book and said, it's so interesting that you say that about Buck O'Neill, or the chapter on Buck O'Neill and his message about doing what you love to do, because he actually ran into another friend at a class reunion, and his friend ended up doing something in the music business, but he had been an accountant in college, and he said, well, what happened? How'd you decide not to do that with your life? And he said, I was coming back on a late night from a business trip, and I got seated next to Buck O'Neill on the airplane coming into Kansas City, and we talked for quite a while, and I was telling him about my job and what a grind it was, and he just really told me, you've got to do what you love to do. You can't waste your time doing
Yeah.
that. And it was amazing to hear my friend say that, and such a, then boy, what a small world kind of moment. But he said that chapter really spoke to him, because Buck O'Neill did talk so openly about those type of messages.
Yeah, absolutely. I do remember reading that section in Think Like a Warrior too, and how just how powerful that was. Because I think that was one of the sections in Think Like a Warrior that really struck me the most. Was Buck O'Neill, just because, like you said, his story was incredible. I kind of want to switch gears real fast and transition more into present day, because obviously, not only not only like athletes, but just everyone in general is so influenced by the presence of social media and stuff, and athletes are way more accessible than they used to be, right? Like you could literally send them a message just randomly, right? They might not see it or whatever, but it's there. It'll be in their inbox or whatever. So I just want to talk. I want to talk to you and get your thoughts on really like the art of perception, because I feel like a lot of people's minds are clouded with that fear of perception and what people think of you online. and stuff like that, especially coming from an athletic standpoint where, I mean, athletes get it the hardest. So how do you think it's, uh, sorry, excuse me, how do you think it can like really be within someone to really keep that same mindset that you talk about in your books about what you can control and what you can control to really overcome like not the bad of social media, but as powerful as social media is?
That's a really, really good question because you're right, just how much it's changed. And I think now that we're seeing more athletes talk about mental health issues and things like that, I can only imagine if you've got millions of followers sending you messages and what that must feel like and how much more of an impact that is and how much harder it is to ignore. I mean, because obviously what we'd want to say is just don't read it, right? Just stay away. Don't listen to the
Exactly.
negative and that sort of thing. And and hopefully people can do that. Hopefully, but I don't know if that's realistic in this day and age to not see any of it. So certainly there has to be thicker skin involved. I mean, I guess you look at anytime you see something posted on social media, the the negative responses almost always seem to outweigh the positive, and it's sad that that's the case, but it sure seems to be, and I'm not talking about just with your friends or things like that, just when you see something posted that's headline worthy, all the so many responses just flood in negatively. And no matter what it is, it could be someone, hey, excited about this new opportunity. Sure enough, you'll see people, being sarcastic or mocking it or something like that. Yeah, I don't know what you do other than be you have to be so aware of how that's going to affect your mind. The more you see something, you are going to create that path in your mind to continuously, bring up those feelings. And I think the best thing to do would be to completely never look at it, never see it. Is that real? I mean, obviously, depending on the athlete, if you've got, a million followers, you're probably not looking at very many responses. If you're getting thousands of responses to anything you tweet or post or whatever. But no, I think it just comes down to trying your absolute best to control what goes into your mind, and hopefully that means you're able to ignore that completely. Don't bother reading responses because most of them are going to be negative, unfortunately, or maybe not most, but enough to make you feel bad about yourself, or to question yourself, or to raise that self doubt. One of the things I talk about in the turnaround is the difference between confidence and arrogance. This false confidence is worse than no confidence. Um, and what we mean by that is if someone, there are usually two ways someone is trying to project false confidence, and one way is to act very arrogant, act very like I don't care, I'm loud and obnoxious and I don't care. Another way is to act the opposite, where you act very stoic and I'm the tough guy and I'm not gonna, respond to. But the truth is, how we act reveals our self-image, and if we're respectful to others, you can be assured that person has a lot of respect for himself, a lot of self-respect. And that stuff I think gets amplified online as well. You see people trying to act a certain image as opposed to just doing the right thing, treating people kindly, and that'll come back to you. I really do believe that. But as far as trying to avoid it, I don't know if it's avoidable if you have, a million people following. Like you said, anyone who wants can put up a message, and no matter how mean, or he doesn't have to say it to your face, he can say it behind his computer screen, and that's the sad part of social media. But hopefully, people have gotten better at being able to avoid it. To turn it off. Hey, put out my message. I'm not going to read the responses. I think that's really the only way you can do it if you're, as much as you can, and we all can do that from a sense of, I think, especially with news media, the negative headlines that get all the attention, the fear, COVID fears, all these things, we all have to be aware of what we're feeding our mind. It's obviously important to be informed, but we don't have to be inundated with it. And so I think it's so important to step away at times and make sure, okay, am I getting addicted to my news feed? Am I getting addicted to, oh, I have to keep checking because I want to see the latest, fearful headline or something, something along those lines. I mean, you don't consciously think you want it, but your brain does almost make you start checking your phone. So I think that has to be a conscious decision to say, you know what, I'm only going to check headlines at this particular point in the day, and the rest of the day I'm going to feed my mind positive books, positive movies, positive music, that sort of thing. And I
Right.
guess that's kind of a rambling response to your question, but
No,
triggered
no,
quite a
it's
few other
perfectly
ideas.
fine. I mean, it's perfectly fine because social media is such like a talked about thing nowadays because of the power that we have. You've been mentioning throughout our conversation here about the importance of positive talk, right? And
Yeah.
from a coaching view, I was taking a class in college with Jay Martin, who's the winningest soccer coach across all NCAA divisions 1, 2, and 3. He has over like 700 wins, or something like that. And he was saying that positive talk, or like from a coaching standpoint, like this is like talking from coach to player, that positive talk isn't the best, negative talk isn't the best, but like informative feedback is the best way of coaching. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's important. We have to be realistic. So it's very interesting because you don't want to just totally lie to yourself, but there are ways you can deal with something from a more positive self-talk way. For instance, I know Jimmy Johnson, the Dallas Cowboys former coach who just got inducted to the Hall of Fame. He was actually a psychology major in college, and so he was somewhat ahead of his time, I think, on the way he taught. But he mentioned in his book how important he was, how much he really focused on never saying don't fumble the ball. He never said don't do this, don't do that. It was always more hold the ball tight, hold it here, that sort of thing. It was never don't you throw an interception, whatever you do, don't throw an interception. It was, fire the ball in at your target. It was all the positive. See what you want to see happen. Lou Holtz talked about that in his book. That one time he was dealing with the quarterback, and the last thing he said was, "Whatever you do, don't throw an interception." And that's the first thing he did. When you put that negative image in your head, you're much more likely to have it happen. But that doesn't mean we ignore that it can happen. I think so. As opposed to saying don't fumble the ball, you're saying hold the ball tight. You're focusing on the positive, and I think that's kind of addressing what you're asking because we know from sports psychology lessons, sports psychology research, and even regular research in positive psychology, it has taught us that positive motivation does work better for most people than negative motivation, or fear-based motivation. The motivation that, hey, whatever you do, don't mess up, or you're going to have to run till you drop. That was a very common way to motivate, not just a generation ago, and we've all learned, and studies have shown that performance for most people is much consistently better if it's positive motivation. I believe you can do this. I believe in you. I have the confidence in you. I trust you. You can do this. More of that type of coaching has much better results. And John Wooden was real big on that. He was ahead of his time there. Doesn't mean coaches didn't win the other way. I mean, obviously we can all find the examples, the Bobby Knights and
I was just about to say Bobby Knight too.
right. And so, and times have changed a little bit too. I think there was a certain generation that was much more likely to, my high school coaches were much more along the lines of that more old school fear based you better not mess up type of coaching. But we do know now that that isn't as effective, you know. And now, is there a time to get, there are examples. Some people are better motivated by, you know, whatever, I got to do this. I cannot let my teammates down, that sort of thing. But for the most part, most people are going to be better motivated by positive motivation. And the studies are it's overwhelming as far as what's been proven there.
So you're telling me that hurling a folding chair across the court isn't the right way of coaching, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's frowned upon at least.
Yeah. So one last question here before we end it here. So in terms of self-improvement and confidence and positive self-talk and all the things we talked about today, I'm not asking you to predict the future here, but what do you think? What do you think becomes of this industry, if you will, as we move on into the future years?
You mean the self-improvement industry?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I don't think that'll ever be. I mean, we always need to learn and to adapt and to keep learning how to improve ourselves. I don't think that'll ever wane away as far as it just we go back to just what we were talking, how the leadership styles have changed. What worked for people that came back from the World War II generation or their fathers and things like that, more of the general style of coaching has changed a lot. You really see very few coaches that probably coach like that anymore, right? So I think everything is evolving, and we have to keep learning from the more information that we have. So I don't think there'll ever be a shortage of need for more self-improvement and more understanding and more learning how to get the very best. And again, we can always, like you said, we can find the examples of people who do it differently, but you always have to wonder, you have to be true to yourself, but you also have to wonder, could they have gotten even more out of players had they had the knowledge that we have now about positive psychology and what the studies are all showing. It's kind of interesting to think of it that way.
So if the self-improvement industry it's never going away, as you said, that means you'll probably have to write 80 to 100 more books just to sustain it.
I hope so. That's the goal. Yeah, I think that'd be great. And that's kind of what Sports for the Soul has become, as far as more of an evolving feed your mind. I'm hearing from readers that want that. We just want more. We want to keep feeding our minds, and I'm the same way. I love to keep reading motivational books and things like that, because life will try to kick you down, and you have to constantly try to take control of your self-talk. And I believe one of the best ways is through reading books that are motivational and positive.
Yeah, so keep writing, Darrin. That's all I gotta say. Yeah, I'm sure you will. Well, Darrin Donnelly, I can't thank you enough for agreeing to hop on here. I know it took a good amount of time to get you on here as you were finishing the turnaround, but so happy that I was finally able to talk to you today on the KO Convo.
I am too. This was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot for having me.